Okay, we'll open the work session for the Pinehurst Village Council, July 26, 2022. We have an agenda of several items to look at, mostly related to short-term rentals. And I think we'll open the meeting with item number 2. Do you want to introduce Matt's plan here, Jeff, or we'll go straight to Matt McCurran?
Take it away, Matt.
I think maybe some guidance, too, from the council members as Matt begins this. Of course, he's going to be talking about the survey and the reports we got, his first report, but then the one was sent out recently, and how much detail you want him to go into as opposed to summarize some of the findings. Any particular direction on that, but we'll try to move through it and get on to our other discussions on the subject. So, Matt, go ahead. Thanks for working on this.
Absolutely. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's nice to see you all again. So, as was just mentioned, we received the findings report from ETC Institute the other day, and so earlier this morning, you all received the official copy of that report. And what we've done is essentially taken some of the elements out of that report and included them into some of the slides that you saw or that you all received at the end of last week. And point of the purpose of this is to provide a little extra clarity as to what is in those finding reports, especially around the cross-tabular data that ETC Institute provided for us. And so, as the mayor mentioned, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have. I will say that we tried to highlight a couple of the responses within each of those sections. It is not a true deep dive because that's going to take a lot more than what can be on the presentation slide. However, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have and we can go from there. So as a quick reminder, we did use ETC Institute for this survey. They are a national standard when it comes to using for survey methods, especially when it comes to local government surveys. And they also help to conduct our business and our community surveys each year. Some quick facts about this. Again, the goal was 350 verified results after sending out approximately 4,000 postcards with a QR code to residences. That's approximately 50% of all residences received this survey. And the goal was to have a margin of error of plus or minus 5.5% at a 95% confidence level. And it lasted approximately 2 weeks. Now, as you may have seen in the executive summary, on top of the sending out the QR code, ETC then followed up via text message to ensure that they were that people were responding to the survey. Now, to understand the report that you all received, we did receive over the 350 minimum, which was 401. So we had a plus or minus 4.8% at a 95% confidence level. And just to clarify a point from earlier that we heard, ETC Institute did not state the plus or minus 10% being a significant finding. We within the village used that statement to help us understand what we consider to be significant. Now, the response percentages were very similar to what we saw in the latest community survey when it comes to dispersion across different neighborhoods as well. Now, one of the things that's a little bit different from this survey that you've seen from others is that we have a cross-tabular analysis section, and specifically, it talks about chi-square tests of significance. I thought it would be helpful for us to go through, again, the results, but then also in conjunction with what do we mean by chi-square test of significance. And so I provided a definition for you here. It's essentially a test that helps us to compare observed results with the expected results. And that's purpose is to understand whether or not those results are due to random chance, or if there's a high probability that there is an actual difference between the two types of responses. Now, you all may have heard, and a lot of people are used to the idea of correlations for this. Now, correlations are used for quantitative results, and for when talking about significance, and categorical responses, such as what we have here, such as frequencies, and excellence and goods and stuff like that, they use chi-square test of significance. So different, but also showing helping us to understand whether or not, again, something is done by random chance, or if there's a high probability that there is an actual difference between the two. Now, again, we're going to go into this a little bit more. If you have questions, I'm happy to clarify. Specifically, the chi-square analysis and the cross-tabular results are starting on page 18 of your report, and they go through page 37. They don't just look at the questions around frequency of perceived issues. They actually broke it down for all the other questions as well, and I highly recommend taking some time and looking at that. For the purposes of this, though, since we presented the other information to you around frequency, that's kind of where we're going to stick with when looking at comparisons of results. So generally speaking, as a reminder, there are 372 responses of single family, 24 in multifamily, and 5 in mixed use. So which approximately is about 93% ended up choosing. And again, this is self-selection. They selected single family residents. From the report that we received to the question of how would you rate the quality of life in your immediate neighborhood, and as we've heard earlier today as well, 95% of the respondents selected either good or excellent when rating the quality of life in their immediate neighborhood. When we break that down on the next page to break down by the type of residence that they selected, 94% of single-family residents selected either good or excellent when rating the quality of life in their immediate neighborhood. And then this one takes that data and breaks it down a little bit more and talks about specifically in relation to short-term rentals within a 2-minute walk of their front door. And so by comparison, 76% of respondents with no perceived vacation or short-term rentals within their proximity rated the quality of life as excellent. Now again, I want to be very clear, as excellent. Now, by comparison, looking at just as excellent, you can see on the screen, 1 rental property was 60, 2 was 63, and 3 or more was at 47%. Now, those who did not know of there being a short-term rental within a close proximity was 56%.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, yes.
So 93%, I think it was, of the total responses were single family?
Yes.
And are 93% of our housing units single family, or is it a smaller percentage?
I would defer to Jeff on what whether or not it's a...
The 2017 land use fiscal analysis says, I think it's 17% are multifamily.
Not 93%, and I don't know what the number is.
9,400.
I would expect that it's lower than 93%, and we had some conversation among the staff about why there's this disparity, and I think a lot of it goes back to one of the things that we found when we were doing the land use fiscal analysis, which is that we categorize, and so does the census categorizes, those residences as being vacant, either because they're not permanent residences of their owners or because they're being used as vacation rentals.
Right.
Oh, jumped ahead on me there. So, moving on to the next slide, now looking at overall quality of life, of respondents choosing excellent, there's a 99% probability that there is an actual difference between respondents that have 3 or more vacation/short-term rentals within proximity of their front door compared to those with none. And so let me orient you all a little bit to what this is. I think since it's the first time we're looking at this. In the chart, they ran two chi-square analyses for us. They said a test for us. They said either at the 99th percentile probability that it's not due to random chance, that there's an actual difference, as well as 95%. So what you can see on the screen here, and I'm just going to use this as an example, and the 2 boxes that are in red beside excellent, if there is an A that is under 3 or more, and what that is saying is that the response of excellent of 46.8%, there's a 99% probability that there is an actual difference between that response of excellence of 3 or more and letter A, which is none, at 76.2%. Yes, absolutely. So if it's a capital letter on the screen and it's underneath a number, then essentially it is saying that it is a 99% probability in comparison to the letter in which it's capitalized. So for here, of those choosing excellent, with three or more short-term rentals within close proximity, that number 46.8%, there's a 99% probability that that number is not due to random chance in comparison to the none, which is excellent of 76.2%. So that there's an actual difference. The actual difference, yeah, thank you, Jeff. I may have saw your face there. I just want to clarify that. What I'm trying to say is that there's not a random chance of that response. There is an actual difference. There's a 99% chance of an actual difference, a probability of an actual difference.
And then the other way a chi-squared test works, and for the 99th percentile, is there's a 1% chance that randomly it produced this result. So 1 out of 100, okay? So effectively what we're seeing here, and make sure that I'm saying this correctly for you, if you look at it from the quality of life, how would you rate the quality of life on there? And you got 76% for the folks who have none, nobody around there. That's how they're looking at it. They're saying it's excellent. And then 3 or more, you're seeing 46.8% are saying their quality of life is excellent. The difference between those two is effectively 99% chance that there is a significant difference there, okay? And that's what it's stating on there. So there's no question that as you get more short-term rentals within 2 minutes from you, people start rating their quality of life in their immediate neighborhood as less than excellent. That's what it's saying. I think what you're talking about there is validity on there, which is basically, is it saying what it's supposed to be saying, okay? And due to the way the study was done on there, it's a reputable company. They do this kind of stuff on there. Yes, I would say that is a valid type of thing across the board, and we have a valid survey that has come through here. Now, surveys do have limits, but they're used in medicine and, you know, all kinds of other things on there, you know, polling, but.
I said reliable and you said valid, and to me, that's the same thing. You can rely on that number. Are you saying those numbers are valid?
Yes, and the validity on there is telling you what it's supposed to tell you, okay? Reliability and statistics is a different definition, okay? So that's where I'm coming from.
The layman's
Okay.
interpretation.
I think the layman's terms, as we're looking here, I don't think there's any question that anybody can have that this survey demonstrates that people who live around 3 or more short-term rentals rate their quality of life poorer than those who do not live around any short-term rentals. That there's no question about that.
And for the clarification, of those who rate, yes, of those who rate excellent. Yes. And so as you may notice up there, there are also lowercase letters. Those lowercase letters mean the 95 percentile. So again, you're able to actually see sometimes, again, under none and excellent, you see lowercase b, uppercase D and E. Those are telling you 95% and 99% related to the other letters that are associated with that.
And of course, the difference there is only 5% chance of it being random versus 1% chance of being random. So it's still very reliable overall.
And in general, the 95 percentile is the general measure or metric percentile that is used.
And column E, they don't know whether they live within a 2-minute walk.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Jeff. So, moving on to the next slide here, we also wanted to show overall factors that impact quality of life in neighborhoods. And there were 5 factors that respondents rated at over 90% that are either very important or important. And I don't think too many of these are going to be surprising. Safety at 99%, a quiet, peaceful setting at 98%, housing aesthetics at 97%, community services at 94%, and then walkable streets in the top 5 at 91%. about the importance of those factors.
And part of the reason that we asked this question was to try to give you some framework about, hear about various types of complaints from people that live around short-term rentals. And you can think about how, where those complaints fit in this, right? For example, noisy neighbors, well, that's number 2. Quiet, peaceful setting, right? On the other hand, knowing your neighbors, you know, which I would have thought might have been higher, is pretty low on this one. So it gives you some perspective about how these things that people report, to what degree these things people report actually result in degradation of quality of life.
So Jeff, for example, the complaint that I want to know my neighbors, but you see the social interaction is down at the bottom. Those are just inconsistent.
Yeah, and this isn't saying that it's not important. It's just saying it is not as important as these other factors.
And another way that we tried to get to that in the survey, because everybody can say, going through the survey, everybody could have said, these are all very important. But another part that we wanted to look at is say, okay, well, what are those top 4 factors on that list that you find most important to the quality of life in your neighborhood? And these are the responses of those who chose it as either 1, 2, 3, or 4. So again, as you can see at the top, 88% of respondents put safety as either in their 1, 2, 3, or 4 selection. Quiet, peaceful setting was 77%, and then walkable streets was at 62%. All others were under 50%. Now, when we're looking at the quality of life of the sum of the 4 choices, so again, we just looked at those 4 choices overall. Now we're looking at the response of the top 4 choices. We can see that there's a 99% probability of an actual difference between those that selected 3 or more compared to those that selected none. So as you can see, it was 48.9% and 28.6%.
And I think that what that's saying is that people who don't live around short-term rentals don't recognize how important knowing your neighbors is to your quality of life. It's not until you're confronted with that outcome that you realize that you value knowing your neighbors.
And then for the next one, looking at quiet and peaceful setting, it's another one that I highlighted for the screen. Again, there are more options that we can discuss, but I pointed out that there's a 95% probability of an actual difference between residences with 1 or 2 perceived vacation or short-term rentals within proximity compared to those with both none and 3 or more. And this is actually was a pretty interesting one to me, I think, with looking at this. Those who selected a quiet, peaceful setting as a sum of their top 4 choices, actually none and 3 or more were actually on the in that low 70 percentiles, whereas those with 1 or 2 within that proximity, again, being most important, rated that quiet, peaceful setting at an almost 87 and above rating. So now that we've kind of oriented ourselves a little bit to the overall findings, I'll go ahead and, again, half of these you all have probably seen already within the report. But as a reminder, overall, 21% of respondents chose somewhat frequently or frequently to the question of improper placement of waste receptacles. However, when we break down the results here, we can see that a majority of single-family respondents did respond that they've never or rarely observed an issue. 23 or more of single-family respondents, regardless of whether or not there was a short-term vacation rental choice, reported never having an issue. Now, of those that identified short-term rentals, we did see that their frequency tended to increase, right? And then that the largest percentage was around those with 3 or more, identifying 3 or more within their proximity at 33%. Now, again, that's combining the 24 and the 9% frequencies. Now, when we break it down to look at all respondents, again, we can see that there is a 99% probability with those who chose rarely when it came to between no perceived short-term rentals compared to those at 3 or more. And then we can see a similar result when it looks at somewhat frequently between the two categories, but at a 95% probability that there's an actual difference. And if I'm going too fast, please let me know. Now, looking at problems with noisy neighbors, as a reminder, overall, there are 15% of respondents chose this as either somewhat frequently or frequently. Now, looking at the data specifically within single-family respondents, overall frequency of problems with noisy neighbors increased as the number of vacation and short-term rentals increased. Now, a majority of respondents who chose no vacation or short-term rentals or were not sure reported never having an issue. And then of those who identified those within proximity, choices of never significantly decreased from 58 to 29%. And the reason, again, for the reminder, the reason why we used the word significant was because it was greater than 10%. And we thought it was of note to bring to your attention. With looking at noisy neighbors, there's and I don't want to continue reading off the slide, so I'll try to move a little bit quicker here, is that there's a 99% probability when it comes to frequently respondents, looking at, and I think this is an interesting result, looking at the choices of none, 1, or 2 when compared to 3 or more. So as you can see, 17% in column D, whereas the others were at 2% or below. And then somewhat frequently, we saw that there was a 95% probability of an actual difference with those of 2 or more compared to with none.
17% would also fall into the very reliable category.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. 17% would fall into the very reliable category.
The very significant category.
The significant category, yes. Yes. With looking at RVs, boats, and other oversized vehicles, overall 10% chose somewhat frequently or frequently of all respondents. But with them when looking at specifically those broken down by short-term rentals, 22% of respondents who chose 3 or more observed at least somewhat frequently as compared to 1% to those who reported no short-term rentals. I think that that's, again, talking about that significance of that 10% or more. There's a large disparity between there. 4 of the 5 short-term rental categories received approximately 50 or more responses of never. There is one exception, which is the respondents reporting 3 or more vacation or short-term rentals was at 42%. And as a general statement, again, the number of observed short-term rentals within proximity increases from none to 3 or more, or as that happens, reported frequency percentages generally shift from never to somewhat frequently and frequently. So again, in general, we do see this kind of trend and shift as you go down. Going to the cross-tabular results, the number of the respondents choosing frequency, there is a, I apologize, it looks like this is the old version that is up on the screen. My apologies for that. So it's actually of respondents choosing frequently. It is actually correct. It's wrong on my page. There's a 99% probability when it comes to frequently, when it comes to those who chose no vacation compared to those with 1 or more within their proximity. So again, that's somewhat frequently category. That's, yes. And then the next one talking about frequently, we can see a similar thing when it comes to probability that there's an actual difference between those that chose no vacation short-term rentals compared to those with 1 or more. I'm going to have to confirm that last bullet. I apologize for that. Now, working our way down through parking in the right-of-way. As a reminder, 21% chose somewhat frequently or frequently on the survey, and of those, a majority reported never or rarely observing an issue with parking in the right-of-way. There was 9% of respondents who identified no short-term rentals selected at least somewhat frequently for parking in the right-of-way, which is significantly lower compared to those that said with one rental, two, or three or more. And you can see those numbers on the screen. They were significantly more frequent, though, for respondents who reported at least one vacation short-term rental in proximity to their home compared to those who reported none. And then those who were in the reported problems within the right-of-way were less substantial when comparing those who said reported one, two, or three or more vacation/short-term rentals. Now, looking at those, the right-of-way and excessive vehicles when across tabular results, there's a 99% probability that there's an actual difference when comparing those that chose no vacation short-term rentals compared to those that chose three or more within their proximity. And then of respondents choosing somewhat frequently, there's a 99% probability that there's actually a difference between those that chose none and those that chose two or more. So as a comparison for the last one, there's 6% compared to greater than or equal to 21.6%, just to orient yourself to the screen. All right, we're nearing the end here. The next category, dealing with drug use and public intoxication, they were nearly non-existent for those who reported no vacation or short-term rentals. 89% reported never, and 9% reported rarely. However, reported problems became more frequent for those who reported two or three or more in proximity to their home. So for none, there was 1%, somewhat frequent or frequent, compared to 10% at 2 and 14% at 3 or more. And I may have mentioned this before, but just as a reminder, overall, those 6% of all respondents chose somewhat frequently or frequently to that question. We may move down. Kelly, I may have died. My mouse may have died. Let me clarify that for the record. For people listening at home, I don't want them to worry. All right. So for drug use and public intoxication, again, for those that chose somewhat frequently, we saw a 99% probability that there's an actual difference between those that said no short-term rentals compared to those that said three or more, and a 95% probability of those that chose frequently that there's an actual difference between those that said there were no short-term rentals compared to those that were three or more. Kelly, I'm going to need you for the, see, now it's working. We're going to keep rolling along. Now then, with looking at trespassing, again, and as a reminder, as we went through these, the overall, the frequency of people choosing frequently or somewhat frequently went down. So now we're at 6% of total respondents at choosing either frequently or somewhat frequently. However,
That just a drop off, you think?
It's a question. It's a good question. I believe that it's, as the data suggests, it just seems to be that people are choosing never or rarely and more frequently. So overall, trespassing, as I mentioned, was less observable compared to those other problems. But over 80% of all single-family respondents stated that they never or rarely observed trespassing. Now, 12% who identified three or more stated that they observed trespassing somewhat frequently or frequently, which is the highest category. So it's 6% and 6%. And that, in our estimation, we tend to generally see that trespassing responses generally did move from never to rarely as the number of identified vacation rentals increased. So it's just an observation. All right. And then, you've got it, Kelly. Thank you. I'm going to let her steer. And then there's just one here that I just wanted to bring to your attention, which is, again, under frequently, we recognize that there's a 95% probability that there's an actual difference, again, between those that said none and those that said 3 or more. And last for this presentation, as we discussed prostitution, again, there was no identified significant problem regardless of the proximity of short-term rentals with this question, or with this issue. And if we go to the next page, that we saw some statistically significant differences, but they were all in the never or not sure categories. And that was, again, with the number of saying frequently being so small, as you can see, as those who said never increased over time, those that said not sure, as never decreased across, not sure actually increased. So we just didn't think that there was too much to glean from someone saying, I've never seen it compared to I'm not sure if I've seen it. However, those results are there for you as well. So that was kind of the highlight of the survey results. Again, there's more information available for you within the final report or findings report that you all received today. I'm happy to answer questions about it now or answer questions about it at your convenience.
And this is on
Questions for Mark?
this is on our website for residents. Can look at this and see the same
It will be, yes. So it'll be on tomorrow.
tomorrow. Thank you.
I think the ETC report is, but your presentation is not, right?
So the I'll have to double check with Kristen. We have it. We just, I don't know if it's been published live yet.
Okay.
Because your report helped drill down more
Yes.
than just what I read earlier.
Right.
That's why I
Yes.
found it very
Yes,
interesting.
sir. So both will be available. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Other questions for Matt on the ETC survey? Jane?
Okay, so in this,
Yes.
at the end, page
52 or something.
the last few pages, it says, ask these questions, what's your answer to the following question?
Yes.
And you can choose from a whole lot, a little bit, some none, and then don't know or not sure. And so they, in the report, they break it down so that first they give you the percentages with one percentage line for the not sure. And then they change it and they take out the not sures. And for most of the questions, there aren't very many people who aren't sure. So it changes the percentages a little tiny bit, but not very much. But on page 46, question 7, how many vacation rentals or short-term rental properties are within a 2-minute walk of your front door? 29.2% people don't know.
Mhm.
And they did run that question again, taking out the 29%. But if you look at the other questions about how important are these various aspects of life and how many times you see bad things happening, can we pull out the people who answered don't know to how many vacation rentals you have and run the numbers to the questions again so that we don't have the don't knows participating in the answers? Are we able to do that? And would that be useful? And then the other variation on that question is, what if we took the people who said, I don't know whether or not there's any vacation rentals near me, and made the assumption that those people didn't have any vacation rentals there, and lumped them in with the zeros?
I mean, let me respond to that. Somebody could say, I don't know, but they could be near one that's perfectly behaving and they don't know. So I don't think you can take the fact that they don't know and decide one way or another what that means.
I don't know that, I think, your question, I don't know that you would gain anything by taking them out, because in Matt's report and in the presentation that he just provided you, he shows you the results for each one of those answers, none, 1, 2, 3 or more.
Okay.
And we did use, and I did include the don't knows for those as well, just because, to the point that was mentioned, is that normally in survey responses, if somebody says, I don't know, we may, or they, so if they chose 9, which is usually in the survey, we would pull that information out, because we want to know if those who knew an answer. However, for this one, we thought it was valid to keep the don't knows in there as a part of the conversation, because to Lydia's point, this is a perception question of how many do you perceive to be within your proximity. So it's actually an interesting point to compare someone who says, I don't know how many are beside me, compared to somebody who says, oh, I know that there's one down the street. Now, that person who says, I know that there's one down the street, may actually have 3 down the street. So it's this kind of, we provided that as a full context for just, for full transparency, to be able to say, what are those people who perceive that they just don't have an idea, compared to those who perceive those other responses. That's not to say that there are that many around them either.
Including the results for don't know doesn't diminish your ability to distinguish between the results given by people that report none, 1, 2, and 3 and more. It's just an extra data point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to give you any more value. I think that from what we've seen here, you've got a valid survey on here. One of the things that I wish had been highlighted better with graphs is showing the percentages of people who are around the different amounts of short-term rentals as to how many of them, let's say, frequently or somewhat frequently have problems with noisy neighbors, okay? Because if you look at that on there, in that specific one, it's a total of 34%, depending on the calculations. One of it's 217s, another one said it was 33%, whichever. The bottom line to that, though, is that you have 66% of the people who do live by 3 short-term rentals that do not have a problem with noisy neighbors on a frequent or somewhat frequent basis. So that also tells us right there, and that's not close. It's not like it's 50%. We've had a lot of people say that the majority of people don't want short-term rentals. The majority of people are having problems with the noisy neighbors and things like that, and they're speaking of the majority. You got a valid survey here that's not supporting that. It's saying that the majority of people who live by short-term rentals do not have a problem with that, okay? And so that goes for every single one of them. Now, let's have intellectual honesty here, because in the same respect, this survey clearly demonstrates that if you live near 3 or more short-term rentals, your probability of having some of these issues with these quality of life measures is greater than if you don't live around them. Okay, so I don't think there's any question about that, and this clearly distinguishes that if you live near them, your probability of having an issue is greater. But in the same respect, the majority of people who do live near these short-term rentals do not have a problem. Okay? So it's not the majority of people on there. So the question is, we're going to have, and this is later on here, is this strong enough for us to support a ban on single-family dwellings on there? That's what it comes down to.
To that point, I mean, there's been a lot of, I mean, we've heard a lot from a lot of people in our community, and we constructed this survey the way we did because we didn't think that a popularity contest was the right basis for you to form a decision on when facing the possibility of a constitutional property rights challenge. We believed that we needed to demonstrate that there was an impact. That's what this does. It's not a popularity contest. It's not whether or not people think short-term rentals are appropriate. It's about, is there an impact associated with the proliferation of short-term rentals in our neighborhoods?
Now, I think everybody knows I've been a bit of a skeptic on ETC from the beginning when my deceased mother-in-law received the survey in our mailbox. And I've heard various anecdotal stories from others, one tonight I didn't know about, who got it from her deceased husband. But putting my early skepticism aside, the data here is a little stronger than I thought it would be, as to basically the more STRs you have, the more problems you have as a resident. I mean, that's sort of the way to sum it up. And the question of whether 66% are okay and 34% are having problems, I mean, that's a question of where's the threshold? Where do you draw the line? If 30% of your community is having a frequent problem because of the STRs around them, that's a pretty big number in any poll. That's a large number. It's not single digits. We're dealing with a third of the community.
And, you know,
So that's, to me, is very impactful.
And the point I raised last week is we have tools already to deal with some of these. And the issue is going to be, as is explained to us before, probably a strict scrutiny standard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to play attorney in this, but if you've got, you're looking at taking away private property rights. You're looking at taking away property rights. And to do that, you've got the strict scrutiny test. And I'm just imagining, as I keep saying, we have other tools for dealing with this. We've got a noise ordinance. And I'm just saying there's another, it's not ban or don't ban, it's ban or use some of the other tools. And I'm throwing it out there because, you know, when we first looked at the graphs, and I just thought, well, we have a tool for this, we have a tool for this, we have a tool for this, and it's as though we're ignoring the tools that we have.
And something else in there, Patrick, you mentioned is 33% of the population, and it's actually not 33% of the population, because the people who, on the survey, the people who have 3 short-term rentals around them is 23%, okay? We'll just make it simple, I'll round it up to 24%. 1/3 of 24% is 8. So as you're talking about 8% of the population, okay?
That 8% or what?
Of the population. You said 33% of the population, that's a big deal. What's the threshold? Okay.
Well, I was taking your number of 66% in the survey data.
I understand.
And that's, so I wasn't, whether it's population, sir, I'm just going by the data.
Got it. And the data are what the data are.
They are.
The data is plural. The point on here is that we certainly have evidence that shows if you live near short-term rentals, and specifically if you're around 3 of them or more, and you look at the quality of life measures, you have a much greater chance of experiencing poor quality of life issues as being asked about this. But I go back to, again, you still have the majority of the folks who do not have a problem with that. And so as this survey is going to be used later on to either support people, because you focus, I'm going to support this or I'm going to support this. What I'm trying to get is intellectual honesty, because, and I don't know from a legal perspective if this is going to support or stand up in court, because we know that's going there. Okay.
None of us know that, as whether or not it's going to stand up. That's true.
Some may have better ideas than others.
Well, I cited once before somebody in this council who made some predictions about what was going to go to court and what the legislatures were going to do. Last time we tackled a very tough ordinance. It predates me, but they spent a year debating that buffer tree ordinance. And when it was over, the prediction of legislation, the prediction of a court battle never materialized. I'm not saying that's not going to happen with this.
Okay.
I think this probably will go to court. But I think I think we have a strong enough case and we have a strong enough reason to test this principle, the constitutional one, so be it. But the Wilmington decision left us with very few
Okay.
alternatives.
I've got no more questions, and for Matt on the
Right,
survey,
yeah.
I just think that one aspect of looking at the total amount is worthwhile. In reference to what Lydia said also, there are lots of other tools too, okay? So,
All right. I think we've completed the discussion with Matt, and we ought to move on into the next piece of the agenda, which is Mr. Burrick gets to come back and talk to us, I think.
Thank you all.
I'd like to address what Pat said just then and what you said last time. And I went back and looked at what I presented into the record last time in conjunction with the tree ordinance. And what I said is the home builders previously have threatened a lawsuit if the tree ordinance is adopted. They had threatened that, and I felt like it was my responsibility to do that. And also, the General Assembly, one of our delegation, did put something into a budget bill. So that, both of the things I said were not off base.
Well, they weren't off base, but they did not alter the decision by the council to pass the tree ordinance.
They didn't, but the things I said and put into the record, one actually happened and the other didn't, but I felt like it was my responsibility to tell the council that the home builders were threatening a lawsuit.
Okay. Let's get into the next item here, which is kind of potentially a split report between Doug's work and Darren's work, excuse me. Let's start with Darren. I think we want to get focused on the changes that were outlined. And I'm dealing with the last line of your staff report, Darren, which says staff would like to obtain additional feedback and consensus as to the latest draft amendments and discuss potential scheduling of public hearings for the Planning and Zoning Board and the Village Council to consider the amendments. So that's the net of where we are, right?
That's correct. I mean, I think we've gotten the proposals to a point where we could, we still need to do some wordsmithing, things like that. And there might be some other concerns raised from other quarters, but the ordinance as proposed right now, I think, is in pretty good form that we could start taking it to Planning and Zoning Board. What's not proposed yet is we've not put it on the table of permitted uses at this point. So, I mean, I made some of the changes based on our conversations last time, and they were not significant. The changes that I made from last time to this point are really not significant. We have dates in there that we've not filled in some of the dates, and we've not filled in the table of permitted uses. Jeff, am I missing anything that you can think of? Jane had some, we've seen some emails. Jane had some concerns about accessory dwelling units. So if we want to, and homestays, so if we want additional regulations with respect to homestays, that would have to be added in because it's not inputted into the regular ordinance at this point.
It is a question that you could send along to the Planning and Zoning Board to consider as well.
Yeah, I think our role here now is to come up with a complete a recommended package. It's going to come back to us anyway, but it's got to go to the Planning Board for their discussion and review. We have really very few things yet to accomplish, and one of them is the schedule of permitted uses, right? 8.5.1A, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that I think you've just said it, but there's no other part of the document that we talked about the last couple of weeks that you have any questions on, but are there any other questions from council members about the text part of I'll call it the text part of the document? Anything? Jane, did you have a question?
You saw the comments I put out earlier, and I think what it boils down to is, and I did mention this last time, we have to think through accessory dwelling units. Because if we're going to say that homestays are allowed and not regulated in all districts, and that includes homestays in attached accessory dwelling units. That's one thing. But then detached accessory dwelling units, I believe, are a separate category. And I would not be in favor of allowing those without any regulation. I think that if those are allowed, it's true that they're, or at least it should be part of the ordinance, that they're allowed when the permanent occupant of the principal dwelling is in residence on site. But it's a separate building. So I think those should be subject to Special Regulation 9. Then the rest of my comments were pretty much, how do we word all that, and where do we put the wording for it, so. Other than that, I'm pretty good.
I think a lot of it, unless I misunderstand, I think that the inclusion of SR 9 would do almost all of what you're talking about. And I think that the requirement that the owner be on site is part of the definition already. Is that not right?
Yes, it is.
Homestay, yeah.
But a homestay
Yeah.
is not subject to SR 9.
Right. So
That's
I'm
the
sorry.
distinction
So
I'm trying to
If we
make.
just had either used SR 9 in the table of uses for homestays, or we had a parallel SR something for homestays that
Well,
included most of these, or something that's tailored to.
or we have a third category, I
Yeah.
don't know, something.
What's the definition of, do
Darren will think of something.
you have a definition of homestay? I can't recall.
Yes, we do.
Pull it up.
Homestay is a rental of a habitable room or rooms within a dwelling unit or attached accessory dwelling unit made available by short-term lease or other financial consideration for a period of less than 30 consecutive days while the full-time resident resides on site.
Site.
I thought last meeting we talked about focusing on just the short-term rental, and we're going to leave the homestay alone.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Say again?
Last time, we had this conversation, and we decided we're not going to mess with homestays right now. We're going to leave that
Right.
alone and focus on short-term rentals.
That's my recollection as well.
So I propose we continue to do that.
What was that?
That we're not going to focus on homestays. We had this discussion last meeting,
We
okay?
not impose SR 9 on homestays?
Correct, we're not, but we're going on homestays right now.
I agree with that as long as their homestay is in the principal dwelling. But if it's in a separate dwelling, I think it should be.
And actually, when I think about this, though, I mean, a lot of that stuff that Darren's incorporated into SR 9 is there's a lot of kind of minimum housing standards stuff in there, and why wouldn't that pertain to,
Separate dwelling.
or not? Why not all homestays, you know?
Well, I think the reason was we didn't want to get involved in going into the house where the permanent resident is occupying the house and get involved in, one room. But if it's an accessory dwelling unit, this is where it gets a little bit different.
I don't know how much time we'd be spending in,
How many of those do we have?
yeah.
I think we agree we won't deal with homestays
Yeah.
now. Let's keep it on to short-term rentals and not get into that point. We'll have plenty of time at the planning board and also
Planning,
back
that's
to
right.
us to come back. So I think the real question here is we want to deal with, well, we need to hear from Doug, but I really want to get to the matrix. So I think we've read your report, but please do give us a little summary of that, how you came to it. It's been interesting public statements and commentary from folks who have different approaches on the capital calculation there.
Your profile has gone way up in this community. That's all I want to tell you. I've had,
All the financial gurus in town have, think, what could do with this? Anyway, Doug, please, go ahead.
Yeah, well, basically, we realize you haven't made a decision on whether or not anything is going to be prohibited or not, but if you do get to that point, you're going to need some sort of amortization period, and so this is just a methodology to get there. So we wanted to figure out how much are people losing when they develop a short-term rental and how much are they making? And basically you just divide it. So what we came up with was that the amount that you would make in a short-term rental is based on the cap rate, and the cap rate is basically a percentage of how much the purchase price is. And so we tried to find what the industry standard on that was, and we found 4.5% is a pretty reasonable amount.
That was the low end of
The low end, yeah. And based on the information we found, that was roughly what the Raleigh area was. As an example, I used a $350,000 purchase price for a home, so with a 4.5% cap rate on that, you'd make about almost $16,000 a year. And then to figure out the other half of the equation, you need to find out how much you would lose when you develop and put improvements into a short-term rental. So the industry standard there is about 40% of whatever improvement you put into a home, you lose the value on. The other 60% you make up with the increased market value of the home. What we don't really know is how much money people are putting into their homes when they refurbish them or when they make the initial investment. We estimated 25% because we figured that would be on the high side. So doing that formula again for a $350,000 home, 25% of that cost of the purchase price, and then you take that amount and times it by the 40% that you would lose in it, you get to about $35,000. So the $35,000 is the amount you would lose, divided by the amount that you'd make, about $15,000, $16,000. It takes a little over 2 years to make up the money that you would have invested into it. So looking at these numbers, we recommend that council don't go below 3 years. And that's basically the formula. So I'm sure there are different ways to look at this, but this is what we came up with. It was relatively simple and information that we had available.
Yeah, and you know, based on what literature I've read on the subject, you know, you don't have a responsibility to nail down the absolute right answer. You just have to have a rational basis for making the decision. I think that, you know, as Doug pointed out, you know, there's a lot of assumptions built into that. One of which is that 25%. Maybe it's higher, maybe it's lower. I don't know. It's and the whole thing's a back of the envelope calculation. And for that reason, we recommend not going with 2, but increasing it to 3 or more.
Just briefly, my approach to this is not so much the financial side of it. It's giving those persons who may have rental properties in areas that aren't going to be allowed have a chance to sell the property or do whatever they want over a period of time. I'm less
Their
concerned
investment.
about the financial impact than just doing something that seems appropriate to unwind that, realizing there's going to be other regulations on those properties in the meantime, presumably. So that's just another point of view as we have it.
No, I agree. If all these hit the market at the same time, it wouldn't be good for anyone.
Right.
Right.
Now, I very much came at it the same way. I thought the grace period for folks, I know in the federal government, when you do regulations, if you're going to change from one status to another, you usually allow a grace period for the regulated community to adjust and make changes. There is a wide range of opinion out there, Doug, as to whether your number should be much lower, or there's a few people who say it should be much higher. So I thank you for the work you did in coming up with something that it sounds rational, it looks rational, so I'm fine with it. Thank you.
Okay, so if we're going to look at the schedule 8.5.1A, I would propose that we allow short-term rental properties in RMF, VMU, and VC, in those 3 districts. And I think I would propose that we try to develop a consensus about that for something that can be passed on to the planning board, and they can sort this out.
Can we edit
And
this
looking at-
document in real time? Can we show the proposal and allow the, council to talk about it?
We-
This is a PDF,
That a
so
PDF?
you wouldn't,
Yeah.
unless you have it
Oh,
on the
okay,
network
yeah.
somewhere.
I do not.
And what up?
Yeah, you can't go up to the whiteboard and,
Yeah,
it'd be an expensive piece of technology to replace if we,
a significant amount of the short-term rentals now within the village of Pinehurst fall in those three categories, because that is generally your condo areas, et cetera. That is the one piece of information, despite all folks going through all the data, that I'm not comfortable in pinpointing what is the percentage, but it's a significant amount of those short-term rentals fall there. So they will be, in essence, untouched, other than the ordinance we passed, we adopted, a couple of weeks ago. So I'm comfortable with those three.
And what were they
What are
again? It was
playing-
three districts?
in RMF, VMU, and VC. RMF, VMU, and VC. I think I have that right, yeah. So RMF, VMU, and VC. And as, I guess, well, just Pat said, that's where a lot of the rentals are congregated, and I think what I see is in some of the other,
Look at that high tech.
well, some just, right on the mark, right? Did I just threw a dart there or something?
It's Kelly.
There's a scratch on the screen, and it fits right into the box we're trying to, yeah, they're doing that. I think what I see happening across the board with other municipalities that are dealing with this is that to the degree they're concerned about having or not short-term rentals in single-family neighborhoods, they're not concerned about having it in these sorts of districts. And I think that's where the trend is.
What about OP and NC?
Office professional?
Office professional allows for mixed use, I believe,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
NC does allow for mixed use as well.
They both do.
What does NC stand for?
And Jeff, I think
Road
you talked
commercial.
about OP before some weeks ago, did you not? I think you raised that point.
Yeah, I mean.
Because we have that almost, no,
Jane, what-
Sorry?
I thought Jeff had mentioned that some weeks ago, but I may be wrong. In OP, the idea to have them allowed.
Well, the idea is, I mean, and Garen can answer this question with some research probably, but I know that residential uses are permitted in some cases in at least one of those two districts, and I think both. And if they are there, why would we object to them being used as short-term rentals?
I guess the only thing I can think of is future OP development. That's, I think, that might be
Yeah.
one of the concerns.
Sorry?
Future office professional development that all of a sudden morphs into less office professional and more,
With hotels, de facto hotels on top of them. I don't think that's good.
that's my hesitancy.
Better outcome than single-family neighborhoods in terms of impact, I guess is,
Well,
yeah.
I can't debate you there.
What's an example of an NC?
Neighborhood commercial, so.
Where, yeah, give me, where?
Neighborhood commercial is if you go up Rattlesnake around where Maxie's is and Pizza Bar, the Pizza Ranch and Tater Barn
Okay.
and Village Printers.
Got it.
And then you have a whole assemblage of NC down in Pinehurst South, as we saw tonight. And then there's some NC out on Midland in some of those commercial areas.
Can we pull up a zoning map?
He gave me enough description that
All
I
right.
can see it.
Darren, maybe if you could, is that the PDO?
Yes.
Flip to the residential section and tell
Yep.
us what zoning districts have any type of residential use permitted, other than the obvious ones, the single-family ones.
Neighborhood commercial, office and professional, VCP, which is Village Cottage Professional. Village Residential does not allow mixed use, but it does allow multiple family.
Multiple family.
Correct. And then VC does allow for mixed use.
Yeah.
I don't think we
And
have many
VMU and,
VC property.
VMU must be, right?
Yes, VMU is
Yeah,
correct, yes.
VMU.
So any of those?
And I'm not comfortable with them in the NC or the OP either. I know you keep throwing them back in there, but
What about VR? If multifamily is permitted there,
It is?
VR.
Do we have, I thought I noticed on the zoning map, there's like one parcel
Sure,
of VR in the entire village.
Correct, it's the old tradition site
Oh,
that's at
so that's
Magnolia.
and it's vacant land now, so I don't know why we'd serve that up to be short-term rental. There's not even a structure on it.
Because that also doesn't mean that we
guess,
could,
I would suggest that its location makes it such that the impact would be very, very minimal, but
if you look at the current table of uses, lodging is, no lodging uses are permitted in NC or OP. Bed and breakfast uses are allowed in some of these village uses. But that's, bed and breakfast is more akin to a homestay. So I can't see putting all this lodging in the NC and the OP.
Yeah, in bed and breakfast, of course,
is lodging permitted in RMF,
owner there.
VMU, and VC?
I'm sorry.
Must be.
Jeff, would you repeat that?
Be
This way.
lodging permitted in VMU?
when you say lodging, we have bed and breakfast,
Hotels?
hotels only allowed in the hotel district and the hospital district
Bed and breakfast is
as well as the
permitted in
VMU and VC districts. Bed and breakfasts are allowed in hotel districts as well as the VCP, VR, and VMU district.
Darren, repeat the last part of that.
For bed and breakfasts, they're allowed in the hotel district, the VCP district, the VR district, and the VMU district.
Right, but hotels are allowed in the hotel district, the hospital district, the VMU and the VC. So presumably, that's where the idea of putting them in our multifamily, because that's where the highest concentration is now. That was that wacky little calculation I tried to put together before. But there's a much higher concentration of currently existing short-term rentals in multifamily than in single family, even though the hard numbers are about the same.
Yeah.
If you look at the percentage of our dwelling units that are multifamily, there are something like 15% of them are multifamily and 85% are single family. So a much smaller percentage of the single family home dwelling units. Anyway, but then looking at the lodging, okay, so hotel is also allowed, subject to special regulation, SRs, but in VMU and VC. So that being the case, allowing short-term rentals in RMF, VMU, and VC seems to go with what we have in place in the table of uses now.
I don't know if we have any examples of this, but one word of caution that we can flesh out at a later time is that if in some of these other districts, there are existing short-term rentals with people that have property rights, again, you have to have a basis for taking away that property right. We haven't developed that with any of the surveying results. provided you.
Well,
Talking about in general or just with respect to these
I'm
districts?
talking, if there is one in neighborhood commercial or OP or,
Well, we know there are in single-family residential. So it's,
basis there. The survey results should give you the basis for making that
Right, I get your point.
rational decision.
see what you're saying.
It does or it doesn't. But you're saying we didn't go out to these other districts and get survey data from them?
There's just not enough, the density isn't there. There's no way you statistically demonstrate anything.
They're just not there.
So they would have a better.
Maybe the better thing is to just go back through that good, fairly complete list that we've got from members of our public and see if any of that stuff actually
Talking
is.
about-
Yeah.
To see if there are some short-term rentals in
Yeah.
NC and OP?
Yeah, NC, OP, VCP, yeah.
My feeling is more of preventive going forward rather than current, but I think your advice is wise. We ought to just do the due diligence.
that check,
See if
yeah.
there's many. I don't know if there are many there at all, but
How would we
Maybe
do that?
there may be none.
there, yeah. I mean, I don't doubt it.
The only source we have, though, is that one piece of, one documentation piece, right? It's got the 400 names and the locations.
Yeah.
I mean, I know showing it on a map, it was hard to demonstrate how many were in a particular area. I think Jane asked that
We've got a
question
map
somewhere.
attached somewhere here that we could take a look
Yeah.
at it, maybe do
Well,
a sanity check.
But that's how we'd go about it. We'd be able to, by address, which we have on that
Oh.
piece of data.
Mr. Mayor, we could adopt your recommendation, and then we can revisit and come back if we
Yes.
have to and add. So
Yes.
we don't have to.
Yes. So we have it at least in these three, with 2 or 3 others to be looked at with the data that we have as to where the short-term rentals are located, I think.
We want to make a case or an argument for any of the other ones?
Well, we agreed at least on these 3. Is that council consensus on that? That these 3, and we may add to it. And we have 3 other areas we're looking at, and then maybe there'll be some more. Yeah.
I think there should be more in there, but again, it's all been said, so we're not going to belabor it. So, and in the single residential, I don't think that we should keep it from being in residential areas with single-family dwellings. But I've said the piece.
What'd you say, Jeff?
I said, I think that we ought to be including in residential areas here where there's single-family dwellings. But I have said that before. I said the risk, I'm not going to belabor the issue, okay? So I think there's 3 people, at least on the council, that are going towards this. And so let's move forward.
I think we all ought to have our say at it, but this is
I just
this
had
is
my
where I
say.
am.
Okay, and again, we've had to say a lot on there. We're not going to belabor it, so.
Okay.
Well, since you brought that up, and I remember we started the matrix, and the purpose of the matrix was to finally get the 2 sides together to talk, and next thing I know, we didn't get the 2 sides together to talk, and I just think, we've had people tonight that have strongly urged us to look at the economic impact, look at the impact on golf, and I just think there's a lot of good information out there that I'm like Jeff, I've kind of said my piece, I'm just summing it up right now, but I think we're headed into a big court fight.
Well, all right, so this is a work session, and we're trying to help create this document. So what I'm hearing is that there's a majority of the council here, a consensus of the council here, to at least go forward with these 3 locations at this time. This is then going to be taken up by staff. We're going to do some research on these 3 other areas, Jeff, that we talked about a few minutes ago, I think, see what might come from that. And then Darren has requested us to, or intends to schedule some meetings of the planning board on the one hand, and then it'll come back to the council on the other.
Correct. I mean, depends on when you want to run it. I can't run it at the next regularly scheduled because I don't have enough time to run a public hearing on that.
Sure.
So Darren, what, do you
Okay.
give them the proposed ordinance and then you bring back to us and then, okay, so that won't be till after Labor Day.
There'll be 2 public hearings, right?
Correct. There'll be one before,
Here.
correct.
Yeah. I'd like to mention one thing that's been in my mind in evaluating this whole short-term rental issue over some months now, and it's become increasingly, in my mind, as one of the elements of the reasons I'm making these suggestions and generally don't support short-term rentals in single-family neighborhoods. And it's this, and you've heard about this, I think, but I seem to read it a lot more. It's becoming business news. And by that I mean short-term rentals, either by small groups of individuals on the one hand, or large investor groups on the other, are being created at the cost of the benefit of people who want to own homes. And to be more specific, the issue is, and this applies to long-term rental properties as well as to short, actually, the issue is that we have investors coming into Pinehurst, coming all across the country, who are buying up lots of homes on a given time, paying over market, paying cash, doing anything to secure those properties, and then flipping them into rental properties, short or long. We know we have some troubles with short-term, we have some troubles with long-term occasionally as well. But what's happening is that the public who wants to own a home is being priced out of the market because so many of these properties are being taken away from those who want to work in Pinehurst or Asheville or Los Angeles or wherever else. And those folks who can't afford a home and are having to rent are losing out on the equity opportunity that many of us have experienced in our own lives to build equity in a home, which is in America at this point in time one of the key assets of individuals going forward, individuals and young families, individuals and retirees as well. So as I look at this short-term rental problem and evaluate the different things we've all talked about and heard a lot about here over the past many months, the issue of taking properties off the market, driving prices up, taking equity opportunities away from those who want to legitimately work and live in an area and own a home is an important aspect to my decision on how I'd like to proceed on short-term rentals. So that's just my take on a few other sort of developing issues in the equation of what problems short-term rentals are having, not only in Pinehurst but elsewhere.
John,
So-
to that point, I believe Phil Sunya has research, peer-reviewed research on that very issue.
What?
I've heard plenty of research about this watching the business news.
And I don't know if it's peer-reviewed, but he has peer-reviewed studies on this very issue, which is perplexing to me. He's a smart guy, and he really does his homework, and nobody's been willing to talk to him.
Well,
Not sure that's true.
I'm sorry, I've got to respond to that. He is the only person that you cited who came before this council and literally predicted, I wrote it down when he said it, that if we pass the restriction on STRs, there would be a drop of 11 to 18% in the first year of the property values in this town. Now, I don't know, I haven't heard anybody else say that. No one else who's maybe very pro STRs or have a different opinion than I do. But I really believe that these sort of rampant, scary projections about what's going to happen to our community, I don't believe them. I don't believe there's any basis in fact to them. I don't believe our largest employer would have the position they do about short-term rentals if that was the case. So I'm trying to deal with the data, as my colleague has emphasized, that the data is the data. Projections are projections. And if people want to take a bet on what the property values, how much they'll drop if we pass this, and they want to pick between 11 and 18%, let me know. The betting window's open at my house. Now, the last thing I want to say is, as I think about this, and I've given thought outside just the constant amount of comments we all receive about that. If those of us who want to have some restrictions put in place in the single-family residential areas, if we're wrong, we adopt something of that nature and we're wrong. Well, as a council, we can correct that immediately. We can just say, oh my gosh, look what we did, let's rescind that ordinance. However, if the people who want to let the status quo go on, and the status quo is no restrictions on where short-term rentals can be purchased, and they're wrong, in 2 or 3 years, it's out of control. It'll have metastasized beyond belief. Look at the rapid growth that's taking place. We will basically be hanging out a sign at the Pinehurst, entrance to Pinehurst, open for business, STR investors. And we know from the data that was collected in Moore County that 78% of the short-term rentals in the village of Pinehurst are owned by people who are not residents of Pinehurst. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. I think we should move on. And is there any other business to be brought to the work session?
Homestays?
Talk about homestays?
No.
No, just as far as mapping them, do we want to allow them in all the residential districts, I'm assuming wherever there's a residential, wherever there's a single-family residential, two-family residential, or multiple family, I'm assuming that we want to, because we want to allow those in all those districts. We don't,
My recommendation is they're
District where you
allowed
would-
where you have the blue marks. They're not allowed where we don't have.
correct.
No, homestays.
Some at homestays. I'm not even dealing with that right now, but
Aren't we
I
getting
don't.
rid of, aren't we getting rid of that line, the homestay line?
Want to tick the boxes
Well,
for
if we're saying there's
homestays?
no problem with them, maybe we should forward the recommendation to P&Z that you want them on everywhere that residential is allowed,
I see.
right?
Everything?
Why don't we let the planning?
Not
board
every,
look at that?
no, NC, they wouldn't be allowed in NC because we don't allow single family. Well,
It's,
Why don't we let the planning board think about that?
Yeah.
Fill in the blanks. We can do that
Yeah, I'd be curious what P&Z says about that. It's just,
on homestays.
Wait, I thought we weren't dealing with homestays, and now
Well,
we're
we're
saying we're
gonna
dealing with
ask P&Z.
homestays.
On homestays, yeah, as a part of their overall review of this.
but we're not defining, we're not establishing really a regulatory framework with respect to the SRs or anything like that. What we would do is, if we place it on that table, it makes it clear that they would be permitted to be located within those districts.
But then you have to keep the definition in there,
Correct.
Yeah, and it is.
which is contrary to our saying we didn't want to deal with homestays, but
I think it was tonight we were going to talk about the homestays. I got no problem in saying, put them in the residential areas or have
Got
PNC
it.
look at it, that's fine.
Got it,
It
got
wasn't,
it.
let's not spin on that one. Let's spin on short term.
Just to back up, and
Got it.
the reason we defined homestays is because we wanted to say that they were not short-term rentals.
got it, that's right.
Therefore, wouldn't be subject to the same
That's correct.
regulation.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay, I think we've given some direction, we've got some follow-up steps to do on this, and we'll be talking about it for a longer time. Okay, is there any other work session business? Any other future agenda business? No.
hold on,
I-
I did have one or two items I wanted to bring up very briefly. I guess two of them I'll do in the closed session, but one, I wondered if, whenever you, all staff thinks it's appropriate, if we could have an update on the stormwater management situation. All this weather and rainstorms going on and electricity going out.
Okay, an update on stormwater. What
Yeah,
else?
the others I'll talk about. in the closed
Like
session.
where we are in the master plan implementation,
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm in no rush, but it's nothing I need to know
get that on a
next week.
future agenda.
Yeah, future agenda.
okay, is there a motion to recess the work session and enter into a closed session?
I move to recess the work session and enter a closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318, 11A3, to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the public body in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body, which privilege is hereby acknowledged.
That's a motion by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jane Hogeman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're now entering into a closed session. We need to do a few logistics here quickly.